All right, how are we doing today? All right, I think Brian did a pretty good introduction on some of the interest rates that we're seeing and the kind of the marketplace that we have. So I'll go look at some of these kind of specific farmland rental and value sales data that I have access to. So I'm Nathan Hulinsky. I'm with the University of Minnesota Extension. I did go to school at NDSU, so go Bison. We beat UND this year, at least in football. Can't say much about the playoffs, but unfortunately. But here we are. I do live in Brainerd, so I'm not on St. Paul or Minneapolis campus. I won't go there. I was gonna say something dumb, but I'll get in trouble. Twin Cities is silly. We'll leave it at that. All right, so we have two good data sources for county average land rents, right? I think Brian did a good approach on interest rates and where the marketplace is, but we have county average farmland rental rates that we have access to, and that's what I'm talking about for the first 10 minutes here. And the University of Minnesota website does have all these published on our website. So I go to our website and I update these on an annual basis. So we have this is just a screenshot of what our website looks like, the U of M extension, and you can see we have an alphabetical list of counties and their last 3-4 years of average county farmland rental rates. So we try to make this very easy to find for everyone in the public. So I do all of our land rent workshops in the state of Minnesota, and I get hundreds of phone calls and emails every single year on what's average rental rates. So this is the data that I do share. And the first data set that we have is from the Center for Farm Financial Management. That's part of the University of Minnesota. It's a department within the university. And they get their data directly from farms who are enrolled in the Farm Business Management Program. Right, so up in this area, we got like Northland Technical College on the other side of the river. I don't know what the closest one in North Dakota would be, but farms who are enrolled in that data collection or that farm management association, their data gets anonymously put into this data set. And in Minnesota, I know specifically, it's right around 10% of farms are in that data set. So it's a fairly large data set. And this is Northwest Minnesota. So we have it broken down regionally. This is the closest to where we are, right? Polk County is not too far away here. And you can see the breakdown on land rent rates up here. So we have 21, 2022, and 2023. This is the average number per county, right? And I know like Polk County is really large, especially east to west. There's a lot of variation, but this is one average number per county. So just to kind of get a ballpark figure of where we're at, I like to show this. And then the 2024 data, that's the most recent. The 2025 data will get wrapped up probably in about middle of March-ish, so probably about 2 months yet before we get the most recent 25 data set. So 24 is the most recent. And we can see we break that down between the average, right? That's just you take how many numbers in the data set, divide by how many they are, or the summation of the divide by how many are, and then the median. That's just the number in the middle, numerically high to low. So it's not the same as the average, but sometimes there's a little bit of a discrepancy between average and median. And if the average is above the median, that means we have some really large numbers in the data set that bring the average up. Okay, and then the 10th percentile, that's the bottom 10%, right? So when you look at a data set, the bottom 10%, that's the 10th percentile, then the 90th percentile, right? So we don't share high and low, but we share the bottom 10% and the top 10%, which are similar to kind of a minimum and maximum in the data set. So that's how we like to show the data. And then on the far side, the other data set that we have for county land rents is the USDA. So the USDA, they publish their data roughly the 1st of September. The USDA, they both send out surveys to farmers. They also have, each FSA office has county committees that go through these numbers and make sure that they approve of them before they're published. We can see, especially different regions, but like we can pick on Clay County back in 24, they had an NA. They just simply didn't get enough surveys and they didn't feel that their data was an accurate representation of what's going on. So that's why there are NAs. Thankfully, in this region, there's not a ton of the not available numbers, but you can see the trends that we've seen. Overall, I think, Brian shared that farmland rental rates have increased, especially starting in 21 through 22, 23 into 2024. They've been kind of leveling off on that. Before I advance, are there any questions on the data set that's on the screen? We don't have to wait to the end for questions. Okay, not. All right, so this is just a breakdown. This is specific to the Finbin data set here, but we can see the 5-year data, the 5-year trend from 2020 to 2024 in Northwest Minnesota. We had a 19% increase, right? We look back at the bottom of the table on here, the state as a whole of Minnesota, we had a 21.5% increase. Not year over year, but over that 5-year period. So pretty strong growth, right? Brian shared very similar data, but we look on the second half of the table from 23 into 2024, we had a negative trends here on farmland rents, right? So the state as a whole was about a 1% drop, and in Northwest Minnesota, a very small decrease. And this is mostly due to where commodity prices are. And I'll share some of this price data in a little bit. This is specific to USDA data, both for irrigated and pasture. We can see not a ton of irrigation up in this area, right? Certain parts of Minnesota, there's quite a bit of irrigation, and there's pretty strong data on that. Just for this region, not so much. And then pasture rent. I know this workshop today is not really geared towards pasture rent, but I do get some questions on what pasture rent looks like, right? I know Minnesota is probably quite a bit different, right? Brian had his family story about Nebraska. That's a completely different pasture scenario than what we're typically seeing in this area. So I'll kind of fast forward through that. And I'm going to talk about crop budgets very quickly here. I want to talk about some other things. I only got about 20 minutes left here. But crop budgets, I put these together. These are specific to Northwest Minnesota. Again, I'll go through them very quickly. I think most of in this room are familiar with where crop budgets have gone, but we can look my top table up there. That's the cost of production. And this is the Finbin data set that I'm getting this from. But back in 2020, the average cost of production in Northwest Minnesota was $3.38 to grow 1 bushel of corn. All right, we fast forward 1 year, right, into 2021, it jumped over $1, right? $4.54 was our farmer's cost of production. We jump forward 1 more year into 2022, right? Brian shared that was the highest farm income in, decades. Our cost of production was $4.82. It's $1.50 increase from 2 years prior. So our increase of input costs was tremendous, right? I think everyone in this room is aware of that. And thankfully, our cost of production, this is corn specific on the screen, has come down a little bit, but still in 24, almost $1 more than what we had in 2020. Okay, and then we can see my list of, yield price data. The 5-year average in the 2024 data, that's actual happenings, accurate data from the Finbin data set. The 26 projection are numbers that I put forward. We can see our list of expenses. I'm not going to go through them in detail. I'm just going to jump to the net income line here. The average corn per acre net income was just under $100 for the 5-year average, right? That was heavily influenced by 21 and 2022. In 2024, the average acre of corn lost $10, right? Parentheses means negative. And into 2026, it's not looking real rosy either, right? I have a negative $37. Okay. Same thing on soybeans. I'll just briefly talk about that cost of production line at the top there as well. In 2020, we were under $8, right? $7.95 to grow 1 bushel of soybeans. We fast forward into 2021. Look at that silly growth, right? Our cost of production was $8. Now it's $11. We had $3 per bushel growth in expenses that farmers had. Right? Cost of production doesn't look at what we're selling it for. It simply looks at our input costs. So tremendous input costs, decreased a little bit in 2022, but then again in 23 jumped another, 70 cents. Right? So I'll just fast forward to my net income line on the bottom of my budget here. We can see the 5-year average just under $70 per acre profit. In 2024, however, losing about $30 to $35. And then my projection into 26 is more or less the same. Okay, I'll do spring wheat real quick here again. Again, cost of production's all over the place. We had $5.50 in 2020. We moved to 2022. It jumped over $2, right? So our costs have increased tremendously. Again, my net income line, both in 2024 and my projection there into 2026 are negative. Okay, one last one here, sugar beets. I do want to highlight, I was harassing Crystal Sugar this morning. For me to get price data on sugar beets is pretty much impossible. That is a closely held secret. It's tough for me to figure out what is exactly going on in the sugar beet markets. We can see my 5-year average price there at $64 a ton. That's the Finbin number. That is not what Crystal Sugars is saying. So this is the Finbin reported incomes. I have heard from other people that the Finbin data set is always collected about this time of year, right? January, February for the previous year. And we don't always get the spring or the secondary fall payment into this. For what that's worth, I just want to say that. I do want to highlight, our cost of production up there as well. Our net income here on the bottom, the decimal place is not inaccurate here. Our 5-year average income there is $444 per acre. So significantly higher than the other crops. And the 2024 farm income here on sugar beets is actually $700. Whereas the other crops I had, I think were all negative for 24. So sugar, I'm not a sugar expert. I think the next speaker is specifically talking about sugar markets. I'm curious what they're going to tell us. But, in 24, we had tremendous income in the sugar world. Into 2026, you can see that number is significantly smaller. I had a phone call with USDA here a couple months ago about how the sugar beet industry was horrible in 2025. Where the net income was significantly lower from 24, but that doesn't also mean a whole lot. We made $700 an acre in 24. Crop insurance questions. I do want to highlight this. RMA, right? That's who kind of runs our crop insurance. They are in charge of it through the USDA here. They are reviewing sugar beet crop insurance. So if you have any input, suggestions, reach out to the St. Paul regional office here, the website, or the emails on the screen. So if you do have input, I don't exactly know what they're looking at. We have some experts in the back of the room here, but if you do have inputs, they're looking at editing what this is going to look like, sugar beet specifically. So I just want to highlight that. Brian kind of had the same graph on the table. This is Minnesota specific median net farm income, right? This plays a big role in what land values do, right? Brian mentioned if farmers aren't making money, farmland sales are not going to be increasing, right? That's kind of the gist of this. And I'll kind of highlight this. Again, Brian mentioned like 07, 06, 07 was pretty strong income, or 07, 08. 09, not quite as much, but again, that 10, 11, 12, crazy high incomes. The red line is just simply inflation adjusted, where the black bars are the nominal dollars of that actual calendar year. But again, look at 2012 incomes. The median income in Minnesota crop farms, $350,000. That's at least in my world, that's a big number, right? I don't make that kind of money working for the University of Minnesota. So that's very strong income, right? I think Brian mentioned in North Dakota specifically, that was like the highest income ever for that year. Nationally, it wasn't quite. And then you can see 2013 through 2019, we were hovering right around $50,000 of income, right? That's not a large number. That's probably below our national like family average household income. That's below that for that 6-7 year window. And then starting in kind of late 2020, commodity prices increased. And then again, 2021 and 2022, huge incomes, right? 2022, as Brian mentioned, was like one of the largest USDA net incomes ever. So very high incomes. We can see we're talking about $250,000 of income for those 2 years approximately. And then 2023, a significant decrease down to about $50,000. And into 2024 here, our median net farm income was $2,300. So not $23,000, but it's the lowest on the screen here for the last 20 years, right? Really poor income in 2024. I know in Minnesota, we had some very large yield loss issues, primarily due to too much water. We just had a lot of rain, a lot of drownouts, late plantings in the spring that impacts yield. But just kind of highlighting what that looks like. This is the same data here, just highlighting the different regions of the state. This is how the FinBin database breaks down. We got Northwest, North Central, West Central, and then Southeast, Southwest, South Central Minnesota. And we can see, I'll pick on Northwest Minnesota. That's kind of more so where we're located. We're still, it's really hard for me. There we go, it's bigger. You know, in 2024, we still had about $54,000 of income in Northwest Minnesota. The state as a whole, I just shared, was like $2,400. So a little stronger in this area. And even in 23, we had, just under $100,000 of income in 23 in this region. So not a bad income. I'm always told. I get all the land rent questions in Minnesota. And every landowner that calls me always, especially in this area, like, the farmer grows sugar beets, so increase that number. Where that's what they always interpret that. I try to highlight that, farmers have a rotation of crops. They don't grow sugar beets on the same parts of the ground 20 years in a row. That's not how we do it. So I try to highlight what industries is teaching us, but breakdown of our profits here. I do also want to highlight farmers have two large safety net programs that we utilize in the farming world, right? Crop insurance is probably the biggest one here through the USDA RMA system, right? We're all familiar with it. Farmers they have to pay to use crop insurance. The premiums are subsidized by everyone everyone in the country, right, as a U.S. taxpayer. But the other one here is the farm bill payments. So these payments on the screen here are Minnesota specific. There is data for North Dakota. I just don't have that on the screen here. But these are for the 2024 crop year, and these payments were just issued in like the last month. They're fairly new payments. With the government shutdown October, November, everything was delayed a little bit, but they should have hit farmers' bank accounts by now. But there are some fairly large payments, right? We can see, I'm just trying to pick on this area. Like Marshall County's not that far away. They had a canola payment, only a few oats payments. There's some sunflower payments, right? Those are not that far away of, Clay, Kitson County, Marshall County, not that far away. Then we have wheat. There's quite a few wheat payments on here. I'll let you guys read the screen. I'm not going to read off every county, but there are some fairly large payments that are coming out. And I will highlight very briefly, there are some decent changes to the Farm Bill moving into 2026. So I'll highlight very briefly what those look like. These are the corn payments, and there are some very large corn payments that were issued here kind of late fall of 2025 for the 24 crop year. You can see, especially if you look at South Central Minnesota, there's all $100 per acre payments on here. So some large payments. Same thing here. This is soybeans, again, large payments. So let's go on to highlight that briefly. I get the question very often when I do my land rent workshops across the state, are these payments to farmers or landowners? Very common question by landowners. I do highlight these payments are issued to the farmer, right? From the USDA's perspective, the farmer is the one taking the risk. And that's why the farmers get the payment, because they're the ones with more risk on it. This is a map. This is put together by FarmDoc through the University of Illinois here. And the darker the shade, the county, the higher the payment. And you can see South Central Minnesota had really strong concentration of corn payments, right? Very large concentration, way more so than North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Illinois. Same thing with soybeans. We had a lot of excess rain here where, again, that kind of central Minnesota had some pretty large payments. This is just a breakdown. Minnesota got 28.84% of the entire ARC corn payment nationwide, right? We got almost a third of the entire payment went to Minnesota farmers, right? So totaling, right, $373 million of corn payments went out to farmers here. Similar on soybeans, there were about a quarter of all the payments went to Minnesota at about $142 million went to Minnesota soybean growers. So I'm just highlighting these payments do not come every year, right? There's a preset formula that I just alluded to a couple minutes ago that is changing. And all of the changes to the Farm Bill starting here in 2026 will lead to a higher probability and higher payments to farmers, right? I don't have the formulas on the screen here, but the percent guarantee of revenue for our county increased from 85 to 90%. The maximum payments per county went from 10% of revenue to 12% of revenue. The other big change is the effective reference price have increased, right? On corn, it went from 370 to 410. On soybeans, it went from 840-ish to $10. So the soybean reference price jumped $1.50 or $1.60. So very strong increases to the Farm Bill formulas for farmers. And then the overall total payment limitations to farmers increased from $125,000 to $155,000. So again, if there will be payments moving forward, there's a higher probability of them, and also they will more than likely be higher than in the past. I do also want to highlight through the most recent federal legislation, if you signed up as farmers for either ARC or PLC in 2025, right? That decision was due April 15th of last year. Farmers will get paid this fall for either the higher of ARC or PLC, regardless of what they signed up for. If they chose ARC and PLC had a higher payment, they'll get the PLC payment. That's specific to only 2025, but that is the way that federal changes that we have had. And then I also want to highlight the sign-up dates for 2026 Farm Bill have not been opened yet. Typically, that's roughly this time through March 15th. I read through FarmDoc that they expect the sign-up dates to be very, very delayed, where it might be summer/fall to sign up for the 2026 Farm Bill, where potentially farmers are going to know what the yield looks like for the 2026 growing season before they sign up for the programs. So just keep that in mind. You can't sign up yet. In all honesty, it's more or less good news to farmers. The more you can delay that program, sign up, the more information you have to make the right decision to get a higher payment moving forward. And then one other thing I want to highlight, the Farmer Bridge Assistance payments, these were stated roughly the 1st of December that this was going to happen. This is like a Trump ad hoc governmental payment. $12 billion in total, $11 billion are going to the crops shown on this screen. The other $1 billion is going to specialty crops and sugar. Which sugar typically is not included in these payments, these other, previous ad hoc payments. But we look at this, and I don't know why, but I like to pick on Southern crops because apparently they have better legislatures than we do, because we look at the cotton payment, we look at the rice payment, and the peanut payment are like the highest on the screen. And obviously we don't grow those crops up here, so I don't know. I just, for whatever reason, again, they must have some better legislatures or something. We can see, again, grown in this area, all the crops on here, right? Corn, it's like $43 per acre. These are paid on planted acres for 2025. These should hit the farmer's checkbook by February 28th. So in about a month, these should be rolling out. But I bring this up because these do play a role in farm values, because if farmers broke even in 2025 and now we're getting an additional $40 an acre, what are they doing with it? Most farmers I talk with don't just throw this in the savings account and hope for something fun to happen, right? They typically use this to buy things to help grow their business or make their business more efficient. And a lot of times these payments get rolled into farm values. So that's why I want to bring that up. This is just local prices. So this is just out of Crookston. I have no affiliation with CHS, but they make their price data very easy to find. Not every elevator does that. So we can pick on corn, right? Corn dropped like 30 cents last week, right? The USDA said on last Monday that there's 17 billion bushels of corn in this country grown in 2025. The highest ever by about 2 billion bushels. So we have a ton of corn. The price dropped about 30 cents. You can see on the screen here. Soybeans are around $9.50. I did read yesterday or the day before that China did actually make 12 million metric ton purchases. that they committed to. So that actually happened when that first was announced a few months ago. That was highly skeptical. Land values. So the University of Minnesota does collect land sales data. These are specific to farmland sales. And I'll just show the data. So again, we can see the number of sales per county for 2024, right? I'll pick on Polk County. We had 43. Average sale price, $5,100. Minimum and maximum, right? So we had, again, I'll pick on Polk County. We went from $1,900 per acre all the way to $10,000 per acre. So large variation in every single county, right? We see like in Clearwater County, we're selling land for $990 an acre all the way up to $7,000. I do want to highlight this data comes from the Minnesota Department of Revenue. That's where land sales transactions, like when you change the deed, gets posted. So you can go through this data set. So I've been updating this data set for the university website I just showed for 2025, and I've been going to this website, going to, right, you can do rural and agricultural farmland, and then crop production and row crop. There's a few different ways to sort through this. And this is what it looks like specifically for Polk County, right? So the most recent sale and data set was the end of September here in Polk County. We had a sale there for $31.87 an acre, right? So we can find very recent farm sales data. This is Minnesota specific. I can't say the same for North Dakota, but we can find very realistic, very up-to-date land sales, right? It's very easy to go to the coffee shop and hear the neighbors say, oh man, that sold for $10,000 an acre. Well, it's easy to round up and exaggerate. We don't say it sold for $3,187.03 per acre. I've never heard that, right? We can get very realistic data here from some of these data sources. This is just the same thing broken down. This is the 2025 initial data that I've put together here for Northwest Minnesota, and we can see the sales. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to fast forward to this. This is USDA data here, and the orange line on top, that is just inflation adjusted. I think Brian had very similar data, but we can see that big run up in the 80s on the middle of the graph, and that big decrease that we saw, right? That was the 80s farm crisis where balance sheets were looking horrible. And you can see at the top of the graph, right, from 2013 through 2020, very flat, slight decrease, and this is national average data. And then 2020 to now, our land rents have jumped. I'll just fast forward 2 more slides. We can see Minnesota actually increased in from 24 to 2025. Minnesota farmland jumped 7%. So a 7% year over year change, which is very strong in the data set. That's the second highest in the whole Midwest, only after Michigan, right? North Dakota was, 4%, South Dakota 6%, where Minnesota was actually a 7% year over year change. So we've had strong growth in farmland sales the last 5 years. This is the same data set, just broken down, and we can see Minnesota kind of in the middle there. In 2021, our average farmland value was $5,000. In 2025 now, it's $7,000. So we've jumped on average $2,000 per acre in farmland values. So that's about a 40% increase in the last 5 years in farmland sales. So, and again, to highlight Brian's point, our farmland sales price points have increased at a much faster rate than our land rent changes, right? Land rent are very short-term changes where it's year over year. I showed my budgets right away are kind of negative the next year, whereas farmland sales are a long-term trend of what the farm industry and other factors that go into that. But farmland sales have been pretty strong. Any questions? I'm kind of at my time limit here. Hopefully this
You'll be around
helpful.
for a little bit, Nathan?
I'll stick around for about an hour.
So we're going to keep rolling here, so find Nathan if you got some questions on farmland values.